Asking you the question of the day: should parents be allowed to hit their own children in the privacy of their homes? Tomorrow, the Constitutional Court will hear arguments on whether or not corporal punishment should be allowed in homes. The court will hear an appeal by civil society group Freedom of Religion South Africa, which believes that a judgment in a lower court last year, which ruled it was illegal for parents to spank their kids, was wrong. It says that will make criminals of well-meaning parents who love their children and want what's best for them. Well, to discuss, we're joined by the Deputy Director of the Centre for Child Law, Karabo Ozah. She joins us from our studios in Pretoria. Karabo, thank you for being with us. First, give us your stance, the Centre for Child Law, on spanking kids.
So the Centre for Child Law is representing three organizations, which are Quaker Peace Centre, which is a religious organization, as well as the Children's Institute and the Sonke Gender Justice, who are submissions that we make into the court, is that corporal punishment violates the rights of children, and also making the linkages between the rights and the lived realities of children, being that children are exposed to violence in so many facets of their life and how our country has become violent. So the three organizations we're representing bring three different perspectives that are very important insofar as understanding why is it that we cannot continue to have a defense of reasonable chastisement in South Africa.
So many parents take this too far, understood, but 4SA seems to have a point. If you give a child a slap on the wrist, right, you can become a parent with a criminal record, you can go to jail, you can even lose access to your kids.
It's a very important point that we need to make clear out there, is the fact that the defense comes up if somebody's already been charged. So we never had an avalanche of cases of parents being tried for using corporal punishment. So the idea that if now you remove the defense is going to cause an avalanche, I think is very misplaced. And in actual fact, in all our submissions, and even the submissions made by the Department of Social Development, is that where parents are using corporal punishment and it ends up being picked up numerous times, they will be referred to parenting programs to try and promote positive parenting and positive discipline methods. So there's no intention to criminalize parents from anyone involved in this case, or on our side, where we're saying that you cannot sustain the defense when you look at the rights that children have in our Constitution.
So you're saying a little slap here or there, people will turn a blind eye to that?
I'm not saying they'll turn a blind eye. I'm saying the law actually makes provision for that. You must remember that in the law there are defenses such as, or provisions for de minimis non curator lex, which is that if a prosecutor was approached and the case doesn't warrant a prosecution, or there's not enough evidence, or it's not serious enough, they wouldn't proceed with a prosecution. So there are measures already in the law that provide for that. And again, I want to emphasize that even up to now, we've had the defense, but the prosecutions of parents for corporal punishment, if you try and find that out, there aren't an avalanche of cases being reported even when the defense was there. So it doesn't necessarily mean that now if you remove the defense is going to lead to an avalanche of cases.
The law already stops abuse. So what is your response to what they're saying, that you can easily distinguish between sort of reasonable discipline and violent abuse?
I think the first thing we are against is trying to calibration of what is a small smack here and a small smack there in the law. I think it would be dangerous to do that. I want to emphasize that it comes from a rights perspective. If you as an adult get slapped on your face, no matter how small or how light, and you've been corrected. For instance, women were beaten, the law allowed for their husbands to smack them. And now we did away with that. So no matter how light you smack an adult, you can potentially be tried. So we're saying we have the most vulnerable group of people who are children, who cannot, on most of the instances, speak for themselves, but we're providing them less protection than what we have said in our Constitution that they're entitled to. The issue of the definition of abuse, if you look at the definition, it's broad enough to include even this issue of corporal punishment. I think it would be wrong to try and say that only extreme cases, and again, it brings us to that. The issue of determining what is extreme to who. Is it me as a parent determining that? How do I determine whether my child or your child experiences as being extreme? that is why we're against this calibration. It's very arbitrary to try and say, well, you know, if it's this light, you as a parent are deciding, but how does the child as an individual experience that is very important.
So in South Africa, we've had a history of corporal punishment. What would you say to parents who are really wondering, with that history, what do they do going forward? Some kids don't respond to words, encouraging words, harsh words. Some kids, you put them in a naughty corner and they won't go. You have to force them to get there. So that's a form of force.
It's a form of force that works short term. I mean, there's a lot of debates about the effects of it and the scientific evidence that's coming up on whether a light or not and all those things. But the bottom line is that insofar as the law is concerned, we need to change the law, and what follows, which is very important, that needs to follow on that, is changing the norms and changing how society views children, and how in most instances, if you were to go and do a research, most of the children who end up getting exposed to the most corporal punishment on a daily basis would have some or other challenges in terms of behavioral disorder, will have challenges in school and all those things. So we're not helping children by using violence as a response. We need to find better methods of understanding why the children are behaving in a certain way. If you're trying methods and they're not getting corrected, there might be an underlying issue that needs to be addressed, rather than using corporal punishment on a daily basis to try and change a child's behavior.
So there are countries that have outlawed corporal punishment. I know it's worked very well in some of the Nordic countries. Are we starting to see the difference between kids who are spanked as children and grow up and those who aren't?
Well, I'm not going to even reference the Nordic countries, because, you know, those things are very controversial. The context is very different. But what we have right now that we've put before the court is the fact that right in Soweto, there's been a longitudinal study for 22 years following children who've been exposed to smacking and violence every day, and children who have not been exposed to it. And it's starting to show the impact of it in relation to aggression, in relation to how they view themselves and their own way, how they see themselves fitting into society and their behavior. So we don't even have to go to the Nordic countries. We have now in South Africa been doing research. One of our clients, Children's Institute, has been involved in it. That's showing that there's a pattern, there's a link with that use of corporal punishment with the violence that we end up getting into society. And that's what we must address as South Africa. As much as it's important to look at how other countries have done it, we must look at our lived realities as a violent society where every day we're dealing with violence, and ask ourselves, if we have normalized corporal punishment and how now we're linking it with violence of a long-term nature, how do we start undoing that?
All right, thank you very much. So interesting, and this will be debated in the Constitutional Court itself tomorrow. That was the Deputy Director of the Centre for Child Law, Karabo Ozah. And remember that we've asked you to engage with us, #FullView on Twitter. Tell us what you think. Should parents be allowed to punish children in their own homes? Of course, it was outlawed in the broader context. And remember, you can WhatsApp us as well.